Okay, in this video I'm going to be explaining how I make arrows, and I'm working on some arrows for a friend of mine. They're made from river cane. Now the first thing I do when I make arrows from river cane is I season them myself. I get them green, either from a friend or harvest them myself green, and I peel off the outer layer. Now a lot of guys don't do that, but I like to peel off the outer layer first and then season them. If they're really wet, like right after a storm or something, and they've been subjected to a lot of rain, I don't peel them right away, because they do tend to crack if you do that, especially right here at the nodes. So I guess I wait a little while to where I feel the cane is dry enough, and I peel off the outer layer when it's still fairly green. It makes it easier that way. And then I season them. Now these are dried for about 3 years or 4 years, so these have been there for a long time, but I think a year is good enough. And after they're seasoned, I go ahead and I cut a section out that spines to the correct spine. Now I wanted these to be between 50 and 55 pounds, so I just roughly put them on a spine tester, and then figured out which section would be the 55 pounds, and I cut the section, straightened them, and re-spined them, and then cut them to length. I cut them, in this case, 30 inches to give me some, extra area here in front of the node. I'll show you why I did that in a minute. But I try to match them all as far as where the nodes are. I try to match them toward the front. See, all these nodes are matched here. The other nodes I don't pay attention to. And at the bottom, I try not to get the node to be at the very end. So after I spine them, straighten them, I weigh them. Now, even though they're the same spine, in a lot of cases the weight differs a lot. Let's see if I can find the latest one I've got. It's 312 grains. The heaviest one is 340 grains, but they're both spined at 55 pounds and the same length. So there has to be a way to compensate for that, or to add weight somehow to these to get them to be the same. They have to all be at least 340. If I have a batch of these and the heaviest one's 340, they have all got to be at least 340, so you got to add some kind of weight. Now the foreshafts add a little bit of weight, but I don't depend on that. Sometimes I can't add very much foreshaft, or sometimes I don't add foreshaft at all. So what I do is I take a piece of grounding wire, copper grounding wire, and I glue that inside the node, inside this section here. That's one reason why I like the node in the front. And these are, give myself about 3 inches in this case, to make sure I had enough space for the wire, because the difference between 312 and 340 is quite a bit. Now these are for a 50-pound bow. So the total grain, the good practice would be, the total grain weight for a 50-pound bow would be a 500 grain arrow for these type of arrows, these traditional type of arrows. So I've already added some copper in here, so I'll just weigh this so I can show you what I've got this weighing at now. Turn it on first. I don't know if you can see that, but it's 408. 408 grains. So I've got to get them all up to about 408 grains. Now to do that, like I said, I use copper. And I just glue it inside here. So after I got them all to, what did I say, 408, around 400 grains a piece, I start figuring out what I'm going to do for the mounting of the arrowheads. Now for these, I chose 4 shafts, and these are Osage. I've got plenty of Osage scrap, so I just sand out some of these dowels on my sander. You know, I rip them on the bandsaw square, and then I round them off on my sander, just by hand, kind of like I did that bow and arrowhead. Anyway, I also taper this on the rounded part of the sander. Now this angle here roughly matches this angle here on this stone reamer that I use. And what I do is I just ream the hole, you know, so that's going to match up with this tapered foreshaft. And make sure it's tight. Now this is going to be different for each cane arrow, so all these have to be made separately. They can't be made mass production. They've got to be made to fit individually and customized to fit just right. And so there's no play. You don't want it any back and forth motion like this. So this part of the foreshaft has to match the diameter, the inside diameter of the cane. And like I said, I round these on the belt sander on the rounded part of the belt. And I just made up this, you know, I napped this reamer. It works pretty good. I just ream out the hole. I do that on all of them, one at a time, to fit the 4 shafts. Now these 4 shafts can be glued in permanently, which is what I'm going to do on the ones that I'm making. I'm going to finish out, I'll finish out these 3 completely, but those other 3 I'm going to be sending off as a kit, so they won't be complete. But I'll go over the process of how I complete these in upcoming videos. This is the first in the series. And I also mark, once I have these aligned and fit properly, I put marks on these so I know where to realign. Now the next step after I get the 4 shafts and the shafts matched up, there is an important step in here I forgot to mention, is the wrapping of the cane here. Now I just wrap with regular thread. I like to use this here. It's 37% cotton and 63% polyester. It's a very strong thread, and I use this for mounting feathers and for mounting the arrowheads for the arrowhead wrap. I'm going to be using mainly modern materials, well, basically all modern materials for these arrows. I'll be using Titebond to glue. I already glued these 4 shafts in permanently, just waiting for the glue to dry with the Titebond. I'll be using Titebond with the thread to wrap the arrowheads. I'll be using Titebond with the thread to wrap the fletchings and to wrap the nock just ahead of the nock so it doesn't split the cane. These are primitive arrows, but they're basically modern primitive arrows. I'll be using obsidian arrowheads, and this size is legal in most states. 1-inch base, 1-inch wide base, no barbs, which means basically straight base. And there's a big difference between the modern interpretation of a hunting point, either stone or obsidian, and real ones. Now these are reproductions of a couple of Southwest point styles, or Texas point styles. And you can see the big difference between what they used to really use for hunting and the modern interpretation. So these have got barbs. They're very lightweight. They weigh less than 40 grains a piece, and they're very, very thin. These weigh on average about 60 grains, relatively thick, so they're durable, and 1 inch wide at the base, which meets most laws for hunting deer, which is what these will be used for. So these are arrows for hunting deer, made of river cane. I hope I've covered all the steps here. Let's see. I didn't mention how much the foreshaft and the arrowheads, they add up to about 100 grains. So at 408 plus 100 grains is about 508. It's going to vary a little bit. So about 500 grains is pretty good for a 50-pound bow, which is what these are for. 50-pound bow at 28-inch draw, which means quite a bit is going to stick out beyond the bow. But there's two reasons for that. I like to keep the weight forward as much as possible on the arrow. I could have put the copper weight inside this part of the arrow and still kept it, the weight in front of center. But for me, the arrows fly much better if I keep the weight as far forward as possible. And that's why I match the nodes up front. It kind of gives me a backing for the copper wire so they back up into it. And this leaves me plenty of room for a long enough piece of wire just in case I need it. And also for the foreshaft, the part that inserts into the cane has to be sufficiently long to give enough stability. So that plus the copper, I give myself about 3 inches just to be safe. They don't touch inside usually. Okay, now once these are dry, what I'm going to do is remove this thread, sand this foreshaft down to match the diameter of the cane, and then I'll taper it, notch it, and mount the arrowhead in here. But I'll go over that in the next video or in one of the next videos. And after all that's done, I rewrap, or I don't rewrap, but I wrap the arrowhead, and then I'll end up rewrapping this part of the cane. So it'll go about ½ inch below the arrowhead, and then another wrapping, I guess about an inch on the cane here, so it'll prevent it from splitting just in case. The glue bond is usually pretty strong, but I like to wrap it anyway. But I'll get into that in the next video. Okay, let's see if I remembered everything here. I'll be making some more videos on different kinds of arrows, but for now this is a good opportunity for me, since I am making a set for a friend of mine of traditional primitive arrows. Okay, that's it.